This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's the place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome, folks. Dr. Charles Parker here one more time for Core Brain Journal, and this is episode 032. And our guest today is Dr. Art Capperauld, and he is coming to us from beautiful downtown Fresno, California. So we're looking forward to meeting you and talking with you. Welcome, Art.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm going to read a little bio, and then we'll talk a little bit about who Art is personally. He is the president of Concepts for Health, a health and healing expert, a teacher, and he's a serious lecturer. His 23 years of clinical experience and thousands of people asking for his advice has helped him to develop a unique system that enables people to take control of their own health in an active way. His professional teaching experience to doctors and the public covers a wide range of topics. His professional experience, 23 years of clinical experience, 20 years of teaching experience, 12 years as a consultant to the world's leading authority on the use of therapeutic and nutrient-dense foods. Get this, folks, plant and glandular concentrates and extracts. And some new words for our audience, for some of our audience, phytonutrients and phytochemicals. So with that, Art, could you tell us a little bit more about your personal life and what you do professionally?
Absolutely. So I'm classically trained as a chiropractor. And I was a pretty straight chiropractor back in the day, meaning that I adjusted the spine, and I was taught that when you adjust the spine and relieve the nerve impingement on the spinal column, that the patient's going to get well. And when chiropractic was discovered, that's actually the case. But I found a completely different story in my practice, that some patients were getting well, some patients weren't, but a vast majority of them were just staying the same. And so I was fortunate enough to come across a mentor that taught me how, when you support the organ systems in the body nutritionally, that it actually corrects many of the spinal problems in the back. And so I signed up and I started learning about this, and that led me into nutrition and actually kind of phased me out of the traditional chiropractic role.
Mm-hmm. So you had a serious aha experience.
Yes.
But it didn't come to you in one moment, one poignant moment. But it
No.
came to you over a period of time of like, this is not working.
Correct.
And what you're saying is, I just wanted to take it further. You know, I didn't know if you knew that I'm an osteopathic physician myself.
Okay.
I'm a DO, so I understand the value of that whole practice. But you know, when it doesn't work, it doesn't matter whether you're a DO, chiropractor, MD, it doesn't matter what you are. If it's not working, what we have to do is look more carefully at what the variables are. And that's what you're bringing to us today. So tell our audience what phytonutrients are and phytochemicals. I think that's really quite interesting.
Well, the gentleman that coined those phrases basically was just coming up for another way of saying whole food nutrients. And phytochemicals are the individual portions that are usually found in the whole food complex. But it's important to remember that it's much more beneficial in the whole food form as opposed to the fractionalized synthetic vitamins that a lot of people buy.
Okay. So it's a whole food concept.
Yes.
And really, thereby, next step would be organic food.
Absolutely.
So what happens is you want to get it as clear and well structured as you can. And so how do you actually come about what your recommendations are going to be? Do you do specific testing? How do you actually ascertain what a person actually needs?
Well, there are several different ways. First of all, I actually talk to the patient, which is really important.
That's a key point.
Yes, because many times patients will tell you exactly what's going on because they've been to so many doctors and had so many consultations that they're able to frame that in a way that tells you what's going on if you're willing to listen. So after listening to the patient, having them tell me what's occurring, then I do a series of tests and exams. I do a lot of old medical tests that they don't perform anymore postural hypotension tests and specific points on the body, along with I do a series of muscle testing. I do structural analysis. I see specific kinesiology tests to see which muscles are working and which ones aren't. And then what I do is I correlate all that data together to see what their body's telling me, but then I have to correlate it with their complaints. And so piecing that all together to show them how the things that are occurring in their body are affecting the actual symptoms that they're having at this point in time.
So let's give us a quick example of that. So where you ask the questions and then form a conclusion and then decide what you're going to do about it. Let's just give us a quick example if you don't mind.
So my intake form is about 20 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
So, after I've gone through that, I will get their 5 major complaints. And let's assume that it's low back pain and high blood pressure and high blood sugar. And so typically when I find something like that, there's going to be some type of leg imbalance in a short leg on one side or the other, mm-hmm. which a good portion of the time, probably 90% of the time, correlates with adrenal fatigue, along with using a postural hypotension test, along with all the muscle testing, then correlating that with their blood pressure, with any muscle tests that correlate with blood sugar issues, and show them how all that pieces together. And then explain piece by piece what the plan is to actually correct that problem. There has to be a dietary change, because anybody that wants to take supplements to get healthy and not shift the food that they're putting in their mouth is not going to get anywhere. And so we set up a specific diet for them, and as you know, I typically use the sugar control diet, and that's to help stabilize blood sugar. And I do this initially for 4 weeks. I don't tell them that it's for 3 years or 2 years. I say, we're going to do this for 4 weeks and see how your body responds. And then after 4 weeks, we can determine how you're progressing and what's changing. If I've actually had this happen. Patient goes on the sugar control diet and the supplements that are recommended for them, and all of their symptoms disappear in a couple of weeks. That doesn't mean that they're better. Far from the truth. So then it's my job to systematically add a food back in, say if we want to add sugar back in or we want to add wheat back in, and then that's the only thing they can shift in their diet, and we see how they feel over the next 3 or 4 days.
So it's a sophisticated elimination process.
Absolutely. I'm just walking them through the process because my job is to get them to create awareness around how the specific foods are affecting them in particular.
Well, because for a moment, sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to make sure that our listeners know that the PDF download is the sugar control diet. So we're talking about it. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that you've supplied that to us, and that's going to be at /032 download, corebrainjournal.com /032 download, so you can get that from Dr. Capperauld. So yeah, go ahead. So talk a little more about that. I just want to put that in there because I think then people have something they can put in their hands and take with them.
Absolutely. So, if you're trying to do this on your own, which, as you know, as a doc, can be, kind of frustrating to patients at times because they don't realize where they're getting into specific foods or they're doing something that's actually affecting them. But it's critical that you follow it very strictly for 4 weeks. And if after 2 weeks you eat something, then you have to start all over again because it can take 2 to 4 weeks to get rid of that specific histamine response out of the system. And then what I do is I add, as I said, groups of food back in, and we chart. I have them keep a diary of what foods they're eating and then how they're feeling after they're eating them. And so then they know, and I have this term in my practice called here's your 2x4, because how many times do patients have to hit themselves on the head with a 2x4 when they see this same response every single time they eat that food? And, as I was sharing with you, I know what foods affect me. And I was away for a family function this weekend, and I got into some and I felt completely hungover the next day.
Now,
And
you
I knew
broke up a
exactly
little bit
where it
right
came
there.
from.
Say
Now
that,
I
Art.
just have to.
Art, say that again, because we're on
What's
Skype,
that?
and it just broke up a little bit when you were telling the story.
Oh, no, I was saying that I was out of town and I got into some Chinese food at a family function, and I was so busy conversing with people that I wasn't paying attention to what I was eating. And I'm very diligent about what I eat. And I was literally hungover feeling for the next day, and it's going to take me another day or two to get back to 100%.
So so it was the monosodium glutamate?
Yes,
And that glutamate then changed your whole neurophysiology. So that
absolutely.
your thinking went out the window.
Absolutely.
And you were telling me just before we started, you could still feel it. It's from.
Oh, yeah, I can still feel it. I can still feel it.
That's because you're sensitized to it and you know what you're doing and you're thinking about it. And we've seen people go back, and we were talking briefly about this, but individuals get measured. They have a very clear IgG problem with their food. They delineate the sensitivity. It's right there in black and white. And then they go to another practitioner who says, okay, your gut is healed and your liver's empty now, so don't worry about it. It's been 6 months or whatever.
Right.
Just go ahead and pop back on the diet. I mean, go off the diet and go ahead and eat what you want to. What's your reaction to that?
I completely disagree with that. It's I believe, and I don't have any proof of this, but this is what I've seen in my practice and through my own experience, is that I believe that there's a cellular memory for specific foods and a specific sensitivity. And like, I know I am very sensitive to milk products. My mother gave my brother and sister and we drank milk and cheese all the time, and we had 11 gallons of milk a week as kids because we were told it was good. But I've been sensitive to it my whole life. And so it took me 5 years of no milk at all and no milk products to even lose the sensitivity, where if I would have a little piece of cheese, my nose would start flowing. And it doesn't create a histamine response that fast for a small piece of cheese. It's just it knew what was coming. And so I see patients with the same problem. And so it takes years for your body to lose that specific sensitivity. But you also have the other aspect where if you eat, say if you have a gluten sensitivity and you don't have celiac, but it still causes problems with your gut. And so as soon as you get back on the wheat products, it's going to start deteriorating the lining of your gut, and you're going to get back in the same place that you were before.
Well, I think the thing is, from my experience, and I'm interested in your reaction to this, because IgG reactions, because food sensitivity reactions aren't so acute, and you don't feel them immediately, then it feeds the denial process. So then they have to go down the road 6 months or a year, and it's like, hey, I'm having a BM 5 times a day, and what's wrong with my medicine not working? How come I feel depressed all the time, and I've actually been suicidal recently? And I never been suicidal. Well, that it takes time. And then I had a guy from California, actually, I was consulting with, and I said, well, let me ask you, are you still on that diet that we talked about? He says, what diet?
Right.
Yeah, so that happens. That we've seen that happen often. I'm glad that you agree with that, because we lecture on that all the time in our office.
Good.
So then, do you do any specific blood testing, or what's your feeling about all that?
I find that I really don't have to do a lot of blood testing. Many times patients will come with blood tests to the office, and we'll look over it. But most of the things that I deal with, they can be subclinical and not at the actual glaring stage of a blood issue yet. And so I haven't, very rarely do I have to send somebody out for blood work.
So then what would you say would be a transformational experience after you began to be aware of all these things and were working diligently, and then had another aha moment where do you have any stories like that, any specific examples of what happened when you went down the road and were doing it right?
Yeah, Well, it's interesting because as you become more acutely aware of your patients and what can cause, well, you're probably in the same boat, is that I've learned that just about anything can cause anything. And so
Yeah.
I don't, right? I mean,
You just stay
I
on
don't put,
alert. That's it. You just stay
yeah.
on alert.
And so I don't put a limitation on anything. My biggest aha moment, again, it was more gradual as it was in the beginning, but it's daily interactions with patients and getting them to see that when they take an active role in their health and they create that awareness, I'm not there to do it for them. I'm there to show them the path, and they have to take the information and figure out ways to incorporate it into their life. I'm happy to help them with that process, but they have to be the ones that are willing to make the shift. And as we spoke earlier about this, but the more that I work on myself and I shift myself and my awareness, it moves patients into those things faster because I'm able to get them to shift faster because I'm able to shift myself faster.
Interesting point. Interesting point. I was wondering, you intuitively figured out what my next question was going to be, because I see this happen with practitioners, myself included. The question is, how do you help a person become actively involved in their care when they're in a state of relative denial about all the nuances of these things? It seems so strange, as we said just a moment ago, that almost anything can cause a problem because of the complexity of the things that we're dealing with. And so that feeds the denial process. And folks come in as like, this just doesn't make any sense to me. How could you possibly be saying that? Do you have any key ways to get people through that?
Well, I know how I do it. Again, I go through a process of finding out what their goals are and coming up with a plan. Part of my requirements is we have to make an extended commitment to this because these problems didn't occur overnight, and it takes 6 months, 12 months, 24 months to get them to move along the process. And so I start real big. I start by cutting out all the major food sensitivities. I work on all the glaring issues that are showing up in their testing. And then as we progress down the road, we hone and we hone and we hone and fine tune until we get to those little subtle nuances. But part of my thing is, again, getting patients to become aware when they put something in their mouth, how it affects them. Does it cause that fatigue to come back? Does it cause that anger to come back? Does it cause the bowel movements to shift? Does it cause you to wake up in the middle of the night? Whatever it may be for you, you have to look at, okay, I added this food back in. How does it affect that symptom?
So then how do you approach issues where people really have a completely obvious number 2 problem? By the way, doctor, I go to the bathroom once a week, and I think it's okay because it's been that way for years. And I really don't have a problem with that. I mean, I do deliver a monolithic stool, and sometimes it's difficult, but hey, I'm okay with that. So then what do you do with that?
Yeah, go ahead. I usually, I don't look at just one of the symptoms. I look at the entire body and work on as many things as we can at one time without overwhelming the patient, meaning I don't want them taking 35 supplements, but they may end up on 7, 8, 9, 10 products along with dietary changes in the beginning. So we're addressing usually the top 3 health complaints. Now, if they've got a blood sugar, say they've got diabetes type 2, and they put diabetes at the very bottom, behind all these insignificant symptoms, according to me, then we're going to have, what I call a knee to knee. We're going to sit down in front of each other and talk about, why isn't this important to you? And find out, because I like to remove all the roadblocks to make sure that they're always moving in the actual right direction to get healthy.
It's interesting because my experience is people put some of these very critical problems over into that is going to be dealt with by traditional medicine only.
Yeah.
I'm going to see someone else about that. That's not anything you can do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's one of the reasons that they came to you in the first place, without them necessarily being aware of it, that these things do, in these variety of other complexities, do actually feed into diabetes, for example.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I don't know about your practice. In my practice, I'm usually the last hope, for a lot of people. They've been through 10 or 15 docs, and we're working to try to get them to a place where they're just surviving at that point. And if people would only understand, if they would start a little bit earlier in the process, that it would save them a whole lot of money and they'd be healthy a lot quicker.
Well, I kind of like that, because that's what happens to me. Even though my practice is a mind-brain practice, one of the reasons I so much enjoy speaking with people like you is because it really isn't just a mind-brain practice. Just your point,
Right.
you were saying a moment ago. If I can't get that body talking to that mind correctly, I think it's sort of like doing mouth to mouth on the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah,
We're actually
absolutely.
we're pumping that canary up and forgetting to look for the methane.
I mean, so my very first patient when I moved to this town in, just north of Fresno, he was a school teacher, a fourth grade school teacher. And I was getting so many referrals of children to come see me because their grades were dropping. And all we would do is shift their diet and change their hypoglycemic content, so then they could focus in school and their grades would go up 1 to 2 points. And children see that. Adults have a harder time seeing that, that you got to stabilize your blood sugar to be able to get your mind to focus a little better. So it's actually a process for adults to learn that.
So do you have a specific way that you think about the relationship between, for example, the bowel and the liver? Do you really try to do liver things first and then do the bowel, or how do you think about all that complexity?
It depends on what shows up in the testing. I mean, obviously, from my point of view, I'm not going to focus on a liver problem unless the bowel's functioning properly, because the liver has to get rid of everything through the bowel and out. And so if it's not functioning properly, then there's going to be an issue. But I always go off my testing first and what shows in priority for testing and their symptomatology. Digestive issues, I'm just as I'm sure you've seen, are prevalent everywhere, especially as we get older. Mm-hmm. And so between the standard American diet and poor digestive function, you can have a successful practice just focusing on that.
Well, can you give us an example of someone who really was a problem for you, that you had to chase down a little bit, chase them through the woods and make it happen, so our listeners can get an idea of that process?
You mean of the process of how I reel them in?
How you reel them in and how you actually connected with them. But
okay.
There was a challenge for you, because the easy ones are easy, and that winds up not being quite as interesting, because it's like, oh yeah, well,
right.
It's pretty patent. But how do you deal with the hard ones? What do you do to chase them down and make that happen?
A very, very good question. So I volunteer my time for an organization that taught me a lot of this nutritional work, and the president of that organization, he calls me a hard nose, because I have certain guidelines that I expect my patients to follow, and if in our initial report of findings we both agree on what our responsibilities are, and if they don't agree to the responsibilities, then I don't take them as a patient. However, if through the process, if they say yes, and then we go through the process, and after the first week, I see that they're doing better and there's some improvement, and after the second week, there's some more improvement, and then after the third week, they come crashing down again. And I say, so what happened? Well, I went to a wedding and I ate this and I did, I didn't take my supplements and I didn't do all the things I was supposed to. I said, well, are you willing to get back on? Because if they're not willing to get back on the program, then there's no sense in us moving forward. Mm-hmm. A funny story on this is I had a patient come in, same thing, and we started checking her, and I said, so, when did you get into some ice cream? And she looks at me and she says, you might as well just put the confessional on your front door, because I can never get anything by when I come in for my visit. So now after you catch them on that a couple of times, they just tell you what they haven't done or what they've done.
Well, now,
and it
what's
helps.
your trick for doing that? How do you could you give us an example? Because I know our listeners is like, what? How in the heck does he figure that one out?
Yeah, there's specific. Well, first of all, I know their case history.
Mm-hmm.
I know what their predilections are, but also I have specific muscle testing that correlates with specific organ systems, whether it's gallbladder or liver or fat digestion, or there's ways to check for milk sensitivity. And so there's specific tests that I do through my muscle testing that I can find those things out. Mm-hmm. And it's usually one of a handful of things, that it could be. And so it's a pretty good educated guess.
So it's through the testing. It isn't something that you see, or it isn't that transparent. Okay.
No, it's not. Unless they come down with ice cream dribbled down the front of their shirt, then I'm not going to know unless I do testing.
Well, I think the testing, no matter what testing you do, it's taking you down a path of real evidence as opposed to speculation. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
Really what we're talking about. I mean, I do a little bit of different testing than you do because I just don't know how to do the testing that you do.
Yeah.
But I think testing is essential rather than just saying, let's try this, let's try that. I mean, if we're working from some standard of care, then testing really has to be involved, because then you could match their progress against previous test results and see whether they're making progress.
Absolutely. You have to have some type of a benchmark to start from.
Yeah, mind science really doesn't have a lot of benchmarks, because the way it is right now, it is kind of a fashion show.
Yeah.
Who you look like is who you actually are, and we know that's not true. So
absolutely.
Well, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the Weston Price reference that you had, which we're going to list in your references and recommendations. What would you say was one of the most interesting learning experiences that you got from the Weston Price readings? I mean, I've read some of his work myself.
Right. Dr. Weston Price is an amazing doc. And what most people don't know is that most of the early nutritional pioneers were all dentists, because they had direct contact with a very short period of time when people would get into an industrialized or processed food diet. They would start to see an increase in cavities. What I learned initially is that the average number of cavities prior to the Industrial Revolution, or the industrialization of food, was 1 cavity per 1,000 teeth. And then that completely shifted, and these docs wanted to know why. So Weston Price took it upon himself to spend his own money and travel around the world looking at indigenous cultures to see what they ate and how their health was. And across the board, he found when they ate food that was indigenous to their area from the ground, or from the animals in that area, disease and tooth decay was almost non-existent. So it's critical that people eat real food.
Well, it's so true. I mean, I was just listening to it today on NPR, and they were talking about the whole breadbasket situation in the American economy. That the whole production of wheat has dropped considerably because people are now having an awareness that it's not just the wheat. There are many more things that the wheat itself can create problems with if you don't know what you're doing. So people are not going to it as a, hey, this is okay, but they're now starting to think about it more effectively, and as a result, the whole breadbasket concept of what's going on. I think this was a report from Kansas, as I recall.
I see.
Pretty interesting.
Yes, it is.
So what would you say about a person coming in to consult with a person like yourself? What are some of the questions that they need to ask the practitioner that would qualify in their mind? Does this guy have a full appreciation of what he's doing? Is this a person that I could work with?
Right. One of the it's interesting because most people don't think about this, but one of the things that I always make sure people find out is, are they following their own recommendations? Do they eat the way that they're going to expect me to eat? Do they take time for themselves to relax on a daily basis? Do they take the products that they're supposed to take for them? Do they drink enough water? Do they get enough sleep? Do they do all the things that they're going to make me do? Again, I live in a small town of 10,000 people, and when I had a practice up in my little town, I'd be in the grocery store, and you're always running into patients, right? Mm-hmm. And what's the first thing they do? They look in your shopping cart to see if you're eating what you're making them eat.
So true.
And so, so that's one of the things, is to, look at them and see if they look like they're actually following those type of recommendations. Secondly is, I work off a referral practice. And so if you can get a referral from somebody that's had success, and if you stumble upon that person, see if you can get some referrals or some people, some phone numbers you can call of their existing patients to find out how they like your specific type of care, because everybody's different. Mm-hmm. And everybody's got a different personality, and what works well for some may not work for others.
So true. That's a very good point, because we see people even in the functional medicine community that don't look like they're taking care of themselves.
Yes.
They're really smart. They're really interesting people. I love talking to them. But then there's a whole question of what is going on with this person. I mean, they really need to be more disciplined about their own care.
Right.
So, Art, I want to thank you very much. You've really covered a lot of bases for us. Don't forget, folks, to get the sugar-controlled diet download that he's going to have available. And, any closing remarks that you would like to make? First of all, tell us your website, and then tell us any closing remarks that you have.
Okay. My website is actually down right now. We're building a new one. Okay. So I'll just give my phone number if that's okay. If they have specific questions, they can call me directly. My direct line to my office is 559-475-8611. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to call. My website will be up in about a month, and that's concepts, plural, for health.com.
Yeah, Concepts for Health. If it's up in a month, it's going to be up when this runs, because we're going to be
correct.
We're going to be about 2 months out. So
got it.
That's great. Any closing remarks that you think would be, hey guys, if we would just pay attention to this larger picture, I think we'd all be in a much more effective, better place.
Yes. As I said earlier, the most important thing is knowing that you can shift your health. Don't allow yourself to make the doctor responsible for your health. Use them as a tool to get the information you need and take control of your own health. What you're going to find is that it's going to shift every aspect of your life. As you get healthier and you have control over the health that you create, it changes all aspects of your life. And so, enjoy that part of it, because it's a complete process.
Thank you so much for emphasizing that one more time. We are so much on the same path. I find myself repeating that so often. And that doesn't matter where you are in the practice of medicine. Self-responsibility is what really makes it for partnership in medical care. Because Absolutely. If you have somebody that's not working their program and you're working their program for them, it's pretty much a waste of time. And that we see that happen in psychiatry as you do over in your work as well.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Art, for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Look forward to working with you again in the future sometime.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Wish you well. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.